What happened in the 1930s? In the 1930s, it was different. The Depression was very bad, worse than it is now. Unemployment in 1933 was 25%. Today it's 8.5%, 3 times worse. Numbers are not exactly comparable, but you get the idea. So the situation then was worse than it was today. There's no money. Every city and state, like today, we don't have the money. We have to cut back the services. We have to lay off people. We have to. Companies not hiring. Terrible. In the midst of that impossibility, the way today Obama and, what's his name? Romney, are discussing what cuts have to be done. And the Democrats pose as those who will cut us less. The Republicans will cut us more. In the middle of that, something happens in the 1930s that ought to make you sit up and take notice. Roosevelt, in 1933 and 4, begins to do what would now appear to be bizarre things. He gets on the radio and he says, I'm going to create the Social Security system. We never had that before. I'm going to give every American 65 years of age or older, in the depths of the Depression, money every month for as long as you live. Here, have a nice day. Wow. Where was the money going to come from? But before anyone could even answer the question, he goes on the radio the next day and he says, I'm going to create for the first time an unemployment compensation system. If you lose your job for no fault of your own, we didn't have that before, just like we never had a Social Security system before that, the government will give you for a year or two a weekly wage for not working. Whoa, you can see why the American anthem would become popular. Wow. There were tens of millions of people unemployed. We're talking big bucks. And then the third day he went on the radio and said, yeah, the 2 things I'm spending money on, I already told you about, it's nothing. Wait till you hear this. He created and filled 12.5 million federal jobs working for the federal government. Social Security for old people, unemployment compensation for the unemployed, and jobs. Where did the mountain of money come from? Answer. Roosevelt went to the corporations and the rich, and he said to them, fellas, remember he comes from that were his friends, his neighbors, his relatives. He says, I got really bad news. You see all those people marching in Union Square in New York, carrying banners? Those are people from the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, the greatest union drive in American history. In the midst of the Depression, the CIO unionized millions of workers who had never been in a union before. And he did that with the help of the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, and the Communist Party, all of which were powerful in the United States at that time. And they were in the news every day. They were marching everywhere. And he went to the rich and the corporations and said, well, you got 2 alternatives, gentlemen. One, you give me a shitload of money so that I can take care of these miserable people suffering through the Depression. I got to give them something big. Because if you don't, coming down the road behind me are the CIO, the Socialists, and the Communists, and they're going to cut you a lot worse deal than I'm offering. Half of the rich and the corporations understood what he said and went with him. The other half didn't buy it. The other half are what then rebuilt the Republican Party after the war to make sure that never happened again. But the half that went with Roosevelt allowed him to go back to the AFL-CIO, well, it was then just the CIO, and the Socialists and the Communists, and he said, look, I'm going to get you something for the mass of the suffering people who are creating your movement. I'm going to give them Social Security, I'm going to give them unemployment insurance, and I'm going to give them a job. I'm going to give them what you're demanding. But you got to forget that crap about going beyond capitalism. You got to drop that stuff, because then I can't get them. That deal was made. That deal was agreed to by all of them. Some with more grief about it, some with more hesitation, but they all bought it. That deal was done. They paid the money in taxes, highest taxes corporations and rich people ever paid in America in those years. It's been cutting those taxes ever since. Okay? Top income tax bracket in 1943, the middle of the war, 94%. Rich people, every dollar they got over about $60,000, they had to give 94 cents to Uncle Sam. They got to keep 6. The same rate today, 35 cents they give to Uncle Sam. The other 65 they keep to themselves. In 1944, Roosevelt went to the Congress and presented a bill that would create a maximum income in the United States. Nobody could earn more than what the equivalent is today. It was $25,000 then. The equivalent today would be $350,000. For every nickel that any American earned above $350,000, the tax would be, ready? 100%. You don't get it. That was proposed by the President of the United States. And when the Congress went ballistic because of the business interests, the deal, the compromise, was that 94%. So he got the money out of the rich. And he created that. And that meant that the Great Depression wasn't as horrible on American people, even though it was a worse depression than the current crisis is, which isn't so bad a depression, but there's no cushion. There's no help. There's nothing. Why? Why? Why is it so bad? That's the question I promised to answer. The final answer, besides all the analysis, is that there was a movement then. Roosevelt had to go to the rich because below was coming something very scary, not only demanding all these benefits, but threatening social change, economic criticism. They were making the concrete demand to debate and change the economic system. And they were so scared, the people at the top, they gave them all of that. By the way, was the politician who made this happen Roosevelt? Taking a great risk, the way Obama has his people tell Occupy Wall Street, I can't do these things. I'm with you, but I can't do these things. It's too difficult. Roosevelt did these things. And what was his reward? The most popular president in the history of the United States. He was reelected 4 times. No president had ever been reelected 4 times. The Republicans were so freaked out by it that after he died, they got the law passed that gives every president only a maximum of 2 terms. This wasn't a political chance Roosevelt took. It's what made him the most popular president in the history of the country. It was the movement from below that observed no taboo that made the difference. And final irony, and if you understand this, you understand a lot of what Hegel tried to teach us about social development. When the war was over, when the Depression had been overcome by the war, that half of the business and rich community that had never bought the threat from below, that were prepared to fight, didn't go with Roosevelt. They made sure to undo as their #1 priority the movement that had gotten Roosevelt to provide for people in the depths of the Depression. They went to destroy the labor movement, they went to destroy the socialist parties, and they went to destroy the Communist Party. And they have succeeded. Over the last 50 years, the labor movement has declined in its strength every single year. It's a line that looks like that. The AFL-CIO today represents less than 7% of private sector employees in the United States. It's done. You can't do anything. The socialist and communist parties are virtual. I mean, they exist, but their political influence is nothing compared to what it once was. They went after them. They destroyed them. And now the irony. The big historical question. Could capitalism have survived an 11-year depression in the 1930s had the leader not provided for people Social Security, unemployment compensation, and jobs? Would things have polarized, and then what? The argument that was always made was that the movement from below saved capitalism from its own excesses. If that's true, then you must wonder whether the system has now destroyed the only chance it has to avoid the cataclysm it avoided last time, because it destroyed the left that might have made this society handle this crisis in a different way. Europe is moving ever closer to the edge of a cliff. the United States is literally talking about a fiscal cliff at the end of this year if you pay attention to these things. We have a capitalism that is spinning out of control. It produced a depression and a collapse that was not expected. It has shown itself unable for 5 years to handle it, to overcome it, to fix it. And it is now pushing ahead as if it doesn't have to deal with this problem. It can just go on. Occupy Wall Street is the first sign, the same mechanisms are reviving again. Nobody knows how that'll develop or where it'll go. But it's a very peculiar capitalism that produces these kinds of catastrophes and develops a politics that makes it uniquely incapable of handling its own problems. The only bad news in all of this is that you and I are living and have to live through this. And the only way to change it is if another movement from below can be created, either to reproduce what happened in the 30s, at least a softer, gentler depression, or the alternative that was avoided in the 30s, which is a final coming to terms with whether capitalism is indeed the best this country can do. But lest you think I'm ending on a pessimistic note, which I'm not, I can assure you that speaking across the country as I do, doing the media work that I do, more interest is in the kinds of analysis I've just tried to present to you in the last 2 years than in the previous 40.